close your eyes and let your mind drift back through the centuries, to a time when moonlight fell gently across the ancient stones of Jerusalem. Picture narrow streets where pilgrims once walked on aching feet, seeking not conquest or glory, but healing and hope. In those quiet corridors of history, where shadows still whisper tales of devotion, we find a story that began with the simplest of human impulses, the desire to care for those who suffer. Tonight, we journey together through 8 centuries of extraordinary lives, men who started as humble healers and became legendary protectors, who built something that would endure longer than most kingdoms. These are the Knights Hospitaller, and their story offers us something precious, perspective on what truly matters, and comfort in knowing that even in our restless modern world, the ancient virtues of service and compassion still echo through time. So settle into your pillow, let your breathing slow, and allow yourself to be transported to a world where ordinary men created extraordinary legacies through simple acts of care. Don't forget to subscribe for more of these peaceful historical journeys, and share in the comments which ancient stories bring you the most tranquility. Let us begin where all great stories do, in the quiet moments before destiny calls, to Jerusalem's sacred foundation. 1,200 words, in the golden light of an 11th century dawn, as the Mediterranean sun cast its first gentle rays across the limestone walls of Jerusalem. A different kind of revolution was quietly taking root, not in the clash of swords or the proclamation of kings, but in the soft rustle of brown robes moving through candlelit corridors, in the patient hands that offered water to parched lips, in the whispered prayers over fevered brows. Around the year 1070, Italian merchants had established a simple infirmary near the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. They called it the Hospital of St. John the Baptist, and it was here, in these humble rooms, that something extraordinary began to grow. Brother Gerard, a man whose gentle hands seemed blessed with healing, had dedicated his life to tending sick pilgrims who arrived in the holy city carrying not just their worldly possessions, but the weight of their hopes and fears. Imagine, if you will, walking through those early corridors in the quiet hours before dawn. The air carries the faint scent of herbs, lavender and rosemary, carefully cultivated in small gardens where the brothers had learned to coax healing from the ancient soil. Candles flicker in small alcoves, casting dancing shadows on stone walls that have absorbed countless prayers. The only sounds are the soft shuffle of sandaled feet, the gentle murmur of Latin prayers, and occasionally, the grateful whisper of a pilgrim whose fever has finally broken. These were not warriors, not yet. These were simply men who had chosen to surrender the ordinary pursuits of medieval life, wealth, family, worldly ambition, for something they believed was greater. Each morning, they would rise before the sun to pray, then move quietly among the beds where pilgrims lay, recovering from the journey that had brought them to the most sacred place in their world. Some had traveled for months, their feet bleeding through worn sandals, their bodies weakened by the hardships of medieval travel. Others had arrived carrying diseases picked up in foreign ports, or along dangerous roads where brigands were the least of their worries. Brother Gerard and his companions offered something revolutionary for their time: care without payment, healing without regard for a patient's station or origin. In an age when medical treatment was largely reserved for the wealthy, when the poor were expected to simply endure their suffering, these men created an oasis of mercy. They washed infected wounds with the same gentleness, whether the patient was a wealthy merchant or a penniless serf. They spooned warm broth between cracked lips, whether those lips belonged to a learned cleric or an illiterate peasant. The brothers lived by 3 simple vows: poverty, which freed them from the endless anxieties of accumulating wealth; chastity, which allowed them to love all humanity rather than focusing their affection on a single family. For young men in medieval Europe, these vows represented a radical choice, the deliberate abandonment of everything society told them they should want in pursuit of something society barely understood. Yet, as these gentle healers went about their quiet work, the world beyond their hospital walls was growing increasingly turbulent. The Holy Land, that precious intersection where three great faiths met, was becoming a place of mounting tension. Christian pilgrims arrived with stories of harassment, robbery, and worse along the roads leading to Jerusalem. Muslim and Christian communities, who had often coexisted peacefully for generations, found themselves caught between the competing ambitions of distant rulers and the rising rhetoric of religious conflict. Brother Gerard and his companions felt this tension acutely. Each evening, as they tended their patients and prepared their simple meals, they could hear the debates echoing through the narrow streets outside. Arguments about faith and politics, about who belonged in the holy city and who did not. Some nights, they would treat pilgrims who arrived bearing fresh wounds from attacks along the roads. Other nights, they would care for local residents, caught in the crossfire of competing factions. It was in these moments of quiet service that something profound was being born. These men were discovering that true healing required more than herbs and bandages. It required protection of the vulnerable, defense of the defenseless. They were learning that sometimes, to preserve life, one must be willing to risk life. Sometimes, to maintain peace, one must prepare for war. The transformation was gradual, almost imperceptible at first. A brother might learn to use a staff not just for walking, but for defending a patient against thieves. Another might practice with a sword, telling himself it was merely to understand the wounds he would need to treat. Slowly, reluctantly, these men of peace began to understand that in a world of violence, even healers might need to become warriors. This ancient model of service, the idea that caring for others might require sacrificing oneself, echoes through our modern world in countless ways. Think of the emergency room doctor working through the night, the paramedic rushing toward danger while others flee, the aid worker who travels to war zones armed with nothing but medical supplies and stubborn compassion. The same impulse that drove Brother Gerard to tend sick pilgrims drives modern healthcare workers to risk their own health during pandemics, to work long hours for modest pay, to choose service over comfort. In those quiet Jerusalem mornings, as Brother Gerard moved between the beds in his simple hospital, he could not have imagined that he was laying the foundation for something that would endure for 8 centuries, that would span continents, that would influence the development of hospitals, medical education, and humanitarian organizations across the world. He was simply doing what felt right, offering comfort to the suffering, healing to the sick, and hope to those who had traveled so far to find it. As the 11th century drew to a close, the Hospital of St. John the Baptist had become more than just an infirmary. It had become a symbol of what was possible when ordinary people committed themselves to extraordinary service. And soon, very soon, that symbol would need to evolve, to grow, to become something that could protect not just individual patients, but the very idea that healing and hope could flourish even in a world increasingly torn by conflict and ambition. The gentle brothers who had started with nothing but herbs and prayer were about to become something the world had never seen before. Warrior healers, protectors of the vulnerable, guardians of a dream that would outlive empires. As the 18th century dawns over the ancient walls of Valletta, the morning light reveals more than the familiar sight of Hospitaller galleys in the harbour and brother knights making their rounds through well-ordered streets. It illuminates a world that is changing in ways that challenge the very foundations of medieval religious orders, where new ideas about reason, individual liberty, and human progress are beginning to question institutions that have remained unchanged for centuries. Picture Grand Master Antonio Manuel de Vilhena reading correspondence from European courts in his magnificent palace, each letter bringing news of intellectual and political developments that seem to call into question the relevance of vows taken by men who have surrendered individual autonomy in service of collective mission. The philosophers of Paris speak of reason as the supreme guide to human action, seemingly dismissing the spiritual wisdom that has guided the order since Brother Gerard's time. The political theorists of London champion individual rights and democratic governance, apparently challenging the hierarchical structure that has enabled effective hospitaller administration for centuries. In the council chambers, where hospitaller policy is debated, these changing currents create tensions between brothers who represent different responses to an evolving world. The older knights, men raised in the traditional understanding of their calling, argue for maintaining the ancient disciplines that have preserved their order through 8 centuries of challenge and change. Their position reflects not stubborn conservatism, but practical wisdom gained through observing how institutions survive and thrive over long periods. The younger brothers, many educated in European universities, where Enlightenment ideas dominate intellectual discourse, question whether medieval vows and disciplines remain relevant to contemporary service. They ask whether the order's effectiveness might be enhanced by adopting new organizational methods, whether their mission might be better served by embracing rather than resisting intellectual and social change, whether their commitment to healing and protection might find better expression through reformed rather than traditional approaches. Brother Alessandro, recently returned from medical studies in Paris, represents this new generation of hospitallers who seek to integrate Enlightenment learning with traditional service. His surgical techniques reflect the latest advances in European medicine. His administrative methods incorporate new theories about organizational efficiency, and his approach to patient care embraces recent discoveries about the relationship between physical health and emotional well-being. Yet, as he makes his rounds through the ancient hospital wards, where generations of brother physicians have practiced the healing arts, he struggles with questions that go beyond medical technique. The philosophers whose lectures he attended in Paris spoke of human beings as autonomous individuals whose highest goals should be personal fulfillment and rational self-interest. How does such a worldview accommodate the vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience that have freed him from personal concerns and enabled him to serve others without regard for his own advantage? The hospital itself embodies these tensions between traditional service and contemporary expectations. The medical care provided remains among the finest available anywhere in Europe. Hospitaller physicians continue to treat patients regardless of their ability to pay, their religious affiliation, or their social status. The surgical techniques practiced incorporate the latest advances from across the European medical community. The research conducted contributes to general medical knowledge in ways that benefit patients far beyond Malta's shores. But European visitors increasingly view these achievements through the lens of Enlightenment criteria that emphasize rational efficiency over charitable mission. They praise hospitaller medical competence, while questioning the necessity of religious vows for medical practice. They admire administrative effectiveness, while suggesting that secular institutions might achieve similar results with greater flexibility and less expense. The naval operations that have made the Hospitallers masters of the central Mediterranean face similar intellectual challenges. Their galleys continue to protect Christian commerce from Muslim pirates. Their diplomatic relationships continue to serve European interests in dealings with Ottoman power, and their military effectiveness continues to earn respect from allies and enemies alike. Yet European courts increasingly question whether medieval religious orders are the appropriate agents for 18th century diplomatic and military activities. The emerging science of international relations suggests that state interests should be pursued through professional diplomats and regular armies, rather than through religious warriors bound by ancient vows. The developing theories of commercial policy suggest that trade should be protected through state navies rather than through orders whose ultimate loyalty is to spiritual rather than secular authority. Grand Master Wilhelm, governing an order that remains outwardly successful while facing fundamental questions about its continued relevance, must navigate between competing pressures that seem to offer no satisfactory resolution. European donors continue to support hospitaller activities, but their contributions increasingly come with suggestions for reform that would transform the order into something fundamentally different. Papal authority continues to support hospitaller independence, but even church leadership shows growing sympathy for Enlightenment critiques of medieval institutions. The internal debates that characterize hospitaller council meetings during this period reflect broader tensions within European civilization between traditional and modern approaches to organizing human society. Brothers who have devoted their lives to serving others through ancient disciplines find themselves defending not just their own way of life, but entire categories of human experience that Enlightenment thought tends to dismiss as irrational or obsolete. Yet the Order's response to these challenges demonstrates the adaptability that has enabled its survival through 8 centuries of change. Rather than simply resisting new ideas, Hospitaller leadership seeks to integrate Enlightenment insights with traditional wisdom in ways that enhance rather than compromise their fundamental mission. The educational programs they establish reflect this synthetic approach. The schools they operate in Malta provide instruction that combines classical languages and religious studies with mathematics, natural philosophy. The libraries they maintain preserve ancient texts while acquiring contemporary works on medicine, engineering, and political theory. The research they sponsor addresses practical questions about hospital administration, naval architecture, and diplomatic strategy using the best available methods from across the European intellectual community. Their medical practice evolves to incorporate new understanding about disease transmission, surgical procedure, and pharmaceutical preparation, while maintaining the traditional commitment to treating all patients with equal care and respect. Their administrative methods adopt improved techniques for record-keeping, financial management, and personnel development, while preserving the hierarchical structure that enables effective coordination across their scattered operations. The architectural projects they undertake during this period reflect the same integration of traditional and contemporary elements. The churches they build combine Baroque decorative elements with classical proportions. The palaces they construct incorporate modern conveniences with traditional ceremonial requirements. The hospitals they design use the latest knowledge about ventilation, lighting, and patient care while maintaining the spiritual atmosphere that has always characterized hospitaller medical facilities. As the 18th century progresses, the Order's ability to adapt while maintaining its essential character earns grudging respect even from critics who question the continued relevance of medieval religious institutions. European observers note that hospitaller administration remains efficient, their medical care remains excellent, and their military effectiveness remains formidable, even as they incorporate new methods and contemporary learning. But the fundamental challenge remains: can an institution founded on medieval assumptions about the relationship between individual and community, between temporal and spiritual authority, between traditional and rational approaches to human problems, survive in a world increasingly dominated by different assumptions about all these relationships? The answer will be determined not by intellectual arguments, but by practical events that will test whether centuries of accumulated wisdom and institutional experience can withstand the pressure of revolutionary change. Like seeds carried on medieval winds, the influence of the Knights Hospitaller began to take root in the fertile ground of Christian Europe's imagination. From their Jerusalem foundation, their reputation spread through the networks of pilgrimage, trade, and noble correspondence, until scarcely a kingdom in Christendom had not heard of these remarkable warrior monks who healed the sick and protected the innocent. Picture the rolling countryside of 12th century France, where autumn mists cling to valleys that would soon echo with the sound of construction. Here, on lands donated by grateful nobles, Hospitaller commanderies began to rise, not just as military outposts, but as centers of learning, healing, and agricultural innovation. Each commandery was a small replica of their Jerusalem hospital, part fortress, part monastery, part medical center, all bound together by the same sacred vows that had transformed Brother Gerard's simple infirmary into an international force for good. Imagine walking through one of these commanderies in the quiet hours after dawn prayers. The air carries the scent of herb gardens, where brother apothecaries cultivate the same healing plants that grow in Jerusalem's ancient soil. In the stable yards, powerful war horses snort and stamp, their breath forming clouds in the cool morning air, as they are groomed and exercised by knights who understand that these magnificent animals are partners, not merely tools of war. The sound of hammer on steel rings from the forges where armor and weapons are maintained, with the same meticulous care that the brothers apply to surgical instruments. But it is in the great halls of these commanderies that the true genius of Hospitaller organization becomes apparent. Here, maps spread across oak tables show trade routes and pilgrimage paths, supply lines and strategic positions. Brothers who might once have been simple village priests now coordinate complex operations spanning hundreds of miles, managing properties and resources that would fund their Jerusalem operations while serving the local communities that had welcomed them. The English commanderies, established in the green countryside of medieval England, became models of efficient estate management. Hospitaller brothers, educated in ways that few medieval landowners could match, introduced advanced agricultural techniques learned from their diverse Mediterranean experience. They built mills and managed forests, bred livestock and developed crafts, all while maintaining their commitment to providing free medical care to anyone who sought their help. In Spain, where Christian kingdoms struggled against Muslim strongholds, Hospitaller commanderies took on a more militarized character. Here, the brothers walked a delicate line between their healing mission and the harsh realities of frontier warfare. Spanish Hospitaller establishments became refuges where wounded from both sides might receive treatment according to the order's ancient commitment to heal all who suffered, regardless of their faith or allegiance. Watch these Spanish brothers as they navigate the complex moral terrain of their situation. In the morning, they might ride out as part of a Christian army, prepared to fight Muslim forces threatening Christian settlements. By evening, they might return to their commandery, carrying Muslim wounded, whom they would treat with the same skill and compassion they offered to Christian patients. This was the Hospitaller way, to maintain their healing mission even in the midst of religious war, to remember that suffering transcends the boundaries that politics and theology create. The network of commanderies that spread across medieval Europe represented something revolutionary in its time, an international organization that operated according to consistent principles regardless of local customs or political pressures. A merchant traveling from London to Constantinople could stop at Hospitaller establishments along the way, knowing that he would receive the same quality of care and hospitality whether he was in rural France or the bustling ports of southern Italy. This consistency was no accident. It reflected the careful organizational genius of the Order's leadership, who understood that their mission required not just brave individuals, but efficient systems. Each commandery sent regular reports to Jerusalem, detailing their resources, their challenges, and their contributions to the Order's broader mission. In return, they received not just general guidance, but specific instructions on everything from medical techniques to administrative procedures to military tactics. The brothers who managed these far-flung commanderies were often remarkable individuals in their own right. Many came from noble families, educated in the best schools of their time, fluent in multiple languages, experienced in everything from theology to engineering. They had surrendered comfortable futures as lords of inherited estates to serve as administrators for an international religious order. Their local communities came to depend on them not just for medical care, but for their skills as judges, engineers, teachers, and military leaders. Consider Brother William managing a commandery in the Welsh borderlands. Each morning, he might review reports from bailiffs managing the Order's scattered holdings, settle disputes between local farmers, and oversee the training of young men preparing to join their brothers in the Holy Land. Each afternoon, he might work in the commandery's scriptorium, copying medical texts or maintaining correspondence with hospitaller establishments across Europe. Each evening, he would make his rounds through the hospital ward, checking on patients and ensuring that the brothers maintaining the night watch had everything they needed. The flow of resources from these European commanderies back to Jerusalem was extraordinary. Not just gold and silver, though both flowed eastward in steady streams, but also more complex forms of support. Trained horses bred in England would be shipped to Mediterranean ports. Medical texts copied in French scriptoriums would make their way to Jerusalem libraries. Young knights trained in German commanderies would take ship from Italian ports, carrying with them skills learned in the forests and fields of their homeland. Yet this expansion was not merely about extracting resources from Europe to support Middle Eastern operations. The Hospitallers understood that their mission required them to serve the communities that sustained them. European commanderies became centers of medical knowledge, where surgical techniques developed in the diverse medical environment of Jerusalem were adapted to treat conditions common in northern climates. They became refuges during famines, offering food from their carefully managed stores when local harvests failed. They became centers of learning, where rural communities could access education and literacy that would otherwise have been unavailable. The success of this expansion reflected something profound about medieval European society, a hunger for institutions that transcended the narrow boundaries of local politics and offered connection to something larger and more meaningful. The Hospitallers offered European Christians a way to participate in the great drama of the Crusades without leaving their homes, to serve the Holy Land while serving their neighbors, to be part of an international mission while fulfilling local responsibilities. As the 12th century progressed, the network of Hospitaller commanderies had become one of the most sophisticated organizational achievements of the medieval world. More complex than most royal governments, more international than most trading companies, more enduring than most military alliances, it represented a new model of how human beings might organize themselves across vast distances and cultural differences in service of shared ideals. This network would prove crucial in the challenges that lay ahead, for even as the Hospitallers were consolidating their European base, events in the Holy Land were moving toward a crisis that would test every aspect of their organization, their faith, and their commitment to their mission. The wealth and resources flowing from European commanderies would soon be desperately needed, not for expansion, but for survival. Step quietly into the hospital ward of a Hospitaler commandery in the gentle hour just after dawn, when the night's shadows are retreating and the first birds begin their morning songs. Here, in these stone-vaulted chambers where candlelight dances on whitewashed walls, you witness something extraordinary. The daily miracle of medieval medicine, practiced with a skill and compassion that would not be equaled in Europe for centuries to come. Brother Marcus moves among the beds with the quiet confidence that comes from decades of healing. His hands, weathered by years of mixing potions and tending wounds, carry the accumulated wisdom of traditions that stretch back to ancient Greece and Arabia, combined with hard-won experience, gained through treating everything from pilgrim fevers to battle wounds. In the soft light filtering through narrow windows, he examines a patient whose fever broke during the night, noting the clear eyes and steady breathing that signal recovery. The Hospitaler approach to medicine was revolutionary for its time, blending the best knowledge from multiple traditions into something uniquely effective. In their libraries, carefully copied Arabic medical texts sat alongside works by Roman physicians and Greek scholars. Brother apothecaries had spent years learning to read these diverse sources, extracting practical wisdom from each, while adding their own observations about what worked and what did not. Watch as Brother Marcus moves to his herb garden, where morning dew still clings to plants that grow in neat, carefully tended rows. Here are the feverfew and willow bark that reduce fever and pain, the comfrey that helps wounds heal cleanly, the lavender that calms anxious minds and promotes restful sleep. Each plant represents knowledge passed down through generations of healers, combined with the Hospitaler's own experiments in determining proper dosages and preparation methods. The preparation of medicines was itself a ritual of precision and prayer. In the monastery's pharmacy, brothers would spend quiet hours grinding herbs, mixing compounds, and preparing the remedies that might mean the difference between life and death for their patients. They understood that healing involved more than just the physical properties of their medicines, that the care with which remedies were prepared, the prayers spoken over them, and the love invested in their creation were themselves forms of medicine. But perhaps most remarkable was the Hospitaler's approach to patient care itself. In an age when the poor were generally expected to suffer their ailments without complaint, when medical treatment was largely reserved for the wealthy, the brothers offered something revolutionary: dignified care, regardless of a patient's ability to pay. Rich merchants and penniless pilgrims lay side by side in the same wards, receiving the same quality of treatment from the same skilled hands. Imagine being a medieval traveler, struck down by fever in a foreign land where you know no one and speak none of the local languages. The arrival of a Hospitaler brother at your bedside would have seemed like divine intervention, not just because of his medical skills, but because of the patient kindness with which he would care for you. He would sit with you through the crisis hours of your illness, spooning water between your lips when you were too weak to drink, changing your bedding when fever sweat soaked through, praying with you if you were frightened, or simply holding your hand if you were too sick to speak. The brothers understood that healing required more than herbs and potions. They recognized what modern medicine has rediscovered, that emotional and spiritual comfort can be as important as physical treatment in determining whether a patient recovers. Their hospitals were designed not just for medical efficiency, but for patient dignity. Large windows brought in natural light and fresh air. Gardens provided peaceful spaces where recovering patients could rest and reflect. Chapels offered spiritual comfort for those who sought it, while never pressuring those who did not. Their surgical techniques were remarkably advanced for the medieval period. Brother surgeons had learned to perform operations that other European physicians would not attempt for centuries. They understood the importance of cleanliness in preventing infection, though they could not have explained the scientific principles behind their practices. They had developed techniques for treating arrow wounds, sword cuts, and the crushing injuries common in an age of mounted warfare. Perhaps most importantly, they kept careful records of their treatments and their outcomes. In an age when most medical knowledge was passed down through oral tradition, the Hospitallers were systematically documenting what worked and what did not. These medical records, maintained in multiple languages and shared between commanderies, represented one of medieval Europe's most sophisticated attempts at evidence-based medicine. The training of new medical brothers was equally systematic. Young men entering the order as physicians would spend years learning not just from textbooks, but from experienced practitioners. They would start by observing treatments, then gradually take on more responsibility under careful supervision. Only after demonstrating consistent skill and judgment would they be entrusted with independent patient care. This medical mission extended far beyond their hospital walls. Hospitaller brothers served as the closest thing medieval Europe had to public health officers, advising communities on preventing the spread of disease, improving sanitation, and maintaining clean water supplies. During plague outbreaks, when other physicians fled infected areas, Hospitaller brothers remained at their posts, treating victims and comforting the dying, even at the cost of their own lives. Their commitment to medical excellence was inseparable from their spiritual mission. They saw healing as a form of prayer, a way of participating in divine creation and restoration. Each successful treatment was a cause for gratitude. Each patient lost, despite their best efforts, was a reminder of human limitations and divine mystery. This spiritual dimension gave their medical practice a depth and humanity that purely secular medicine often lacked. As we drift towards sleep, we might reflect on these medieval healers who understood something that our modern world sometimes forgets: that true healing involves not just the treatment of symptoms, but the care of whole human beings, body, mind, and spirit. In their quiet commitment to serving all who suffered, regardless of their station or ability to pay, they established principles that continue to guide the best medical practice today. In the pre-dawn darkness of a Hospitaller commandery, as the first bell calls the brothers to prayer, another transformation is taking place alongside their ancient ritual of worship. As morning light creeps across the stone courtyards, these men who have spent the night hours tending to the sick and wounded begin their preparation for a different kind of service. One that requires not gentle hands but strong arms, not whispered prayers but battle cries that can be heard above the clash of steel. Picture Brother Raymond as he moves from the hospital ward, where he has just given the last rites to an old pilgrim, to the armory where his sword and mail await him. The same hands that moments ago offered comfort to a dying man now check the edge on his blade, test the flexibility of his mail links, ensure that his warhorse is properly fed and groomed. This is the profound duality that defined the Knights Hospitaller: healers who had learned to kill, monks who had mastered the arts of war. The training that transformed these religious brothers into formidable warriors was both physical and spiritual. Each morning, after prayers and before their hospital duties, they would gather in the practice yards for weapons training that was as methodical and disciplined as their medical education. Young knights would spend years learning not just how to use sword and lance, but how to coordinate with their brothers in the complex choreography of medieval warfare. Watch them as they practice the quintessential Hospitaller tactic, the heavy cavalry charge. These were not the wild, undisciplined attacks of popular imagination, but carefully coordinated maneuvers requiring precise timing, absolute trust in one's companions, and the willingness to ride toward almost certain death if the charge failed. Each knight controlled a warhorse that represented a massive investment, not just in gold, but in years of training to create a partnership between man and animal that could function effectively in the chaos of battle. The psychological preparation for warfare was perhaps even more challenging than the physical training. These were men raised in a Christian culture that taught love of enemies, forgiveness of those who wronged them, and the sanctity of human life. Yet they were preparing to take lives, to inflict violence, to participate in the brutal realities of medieval warfare. How did they reconcile these contradictions? They were not fighting for personal gain, territorial conquest, or political advantage. They were fighting to protect the innocent, to defend pilgrims who could not defend themselves, to preserve spaces where healing and mercy could flourish. In their minds, the willingness to use violence in defense of these principles was not a contradiction of their faith, but its highest expression. Consider the scene in a hospitaller chapel on the night before a major battle. Knights kneel in prayer, not asking for victory in the conventional sense, but for the strength to do their duty regardless of the outcome, for the courage to face death without fear, and for forgiveness if the heat of battle led them to actions that conflicted with their Christian conscience. These prayers were not the boastful appeals of warriors seeking divine favor for conquest, but the humble supplications of men who understood the moral complexity of their situation. Their military innovations were as impressive as their medical advances. The Hospitallers developed new techniques for siege warfare, improved designs for castle fortifications, and tactical approaches that maximized the effectiveness of their relatively small numbers. They understood that they could not match the massive armies that Muslim rulers could field, so they focused on superior training, better equipment, and tactical superiority. Their castles became legendary throughout the medieval world, not just as military strongholds, but as architectural marvels that combined defensive effectiveness with the practical needs of their dual mission. Crac des Chevaliers, their greatest fortress, was designed as both an impregnable military position and a functioning hospital. Its walls could withstand siege engines, but its courtyards included gardens where medicinal herbs grew. Its towers contained libraries where medical texts were copied, and its halls could serve either as military barracks or hospital wards as circumstances required. The brotherhood forged in these military operations was unlike anything found in secular armies. These men had sworn vows that bound them not just to their order, but to each other. They could not retreat from battle to preserve their personal interests, could not abandon wounded comrades to save themselves, could not prioritize their own survival over the mission they had sworn to serve. This created a level of military discipline and mutual loyalty that their enemies found almost impossible to break. Yet, even in warfare, they maintained their commitment to their healing mission. Hospitaller knights would often be seen on battlefields after the fighting ended, tending to wounded enemies with the same skill they offered to wounded Christians. Their medical knowledge made them valuable even to opponents who had been trying to kill them hours earlier. This commitment to healing all who suffered, regardless of their religion or allegiance, earned them a unique respect even from their enemies. The internal conflicts these warrior monks faced must have been profound. Brother knights wrote letters home describing nightmares, where they relived moments of violence, periods of spiritual doubt when they questioned whether their actions were consistent with Christian teaching, and the constant struggle to maintain their spiritual discipline while living lives that frequently required them to take human life. Modern soldiers and police officers face similar psychological challenges. The need to be prepared for violence, while hoping never to use it, the burden of making split-second decisions about life and death. The difficulty of maintaining moral clarity in situations where every choice involves moral compromise. The Hospitallers' approach to these challenges, emphasizing duty over personal preference, service over self-interest, and the protection of innocence over personal safety, offers insights that remain relevant today. Their reputation for military prowess grew throughout the 12th and 13th centuries, but it never overshadowed their reputation for mercy. Stories spread throughout the medieval world of Hospitaller knights who had risked their own lives to rescue wounded enemies, who had shared their rations with starving opponents during sieges, who had negotiated truces to allow the burial of the dead from both sides. The equipment and tactics that made them effective warriors were constantly evolving. They were among the first European knights to adopt crossbows on a large scale, recognizing that these weapons could give their relatively small forces significant advantages against larger enemy armies. They developed new techniques for coordinating infantry and cavalry, for conducting fighting retreats, and for defending fixed positions against superior numbers. But perhaps their greatest military achievement was simply their persistence. Unlike secular armies that might disperse after a single campaign, unlike royal forces that served only as long as their king could pay them, the Hospitallers maintained their military commitment year after year, decade after decade. They were always there, always ready, always willing to face whatever challenges threatened the vulnerable people they had sworn to protect. As the golden age of the Crusader states began to wane, as Muslim forces grew stronger and more unified, the military demands on the Hospitallers grew correspondingly heavier. They found themselves defending not just individual pilgrims, but entire Christian communities, not just maintaining hospitals, but preserving the very possibility that Christians and Muslims might coexist peacefully in the Holy Land. The warrior monks who had begun as a small group of healers had become one of the most formidable military forces in the medieval Mediterranean. But their greatest test was yet to come, a challenge that would force them to discover whether their military skills, their spiritual discipline, and their commitment to their mission would be sufficient to preserve what they had spent centuries building. The news reached the Hospital of St. John on a morning that dawned no differently from thousands of others, yet would mark the end of everything the Hospitallers had built over more than a century of devoted service. It was October 1187, and Saladin's army was at the gates of Jerusalem. After nearly 90 years of Christian rule, the Holy City was about to return to Muslim control, and with it would go the original home of the order that had grown from Brother Gerard's simple desire to heal sick pilgrims. Picture the scene in the great hall where Grand Master Roger de Moulin had once planned expansions and coordinated medical supplies for their growing network of hospitals. Now, that same hall filled with the quiet conversations of knights and brothers discussing terms of surrender, their voices carrying the weight of men who understood that they were witnessing the end of an era. The walls that had echoed with the sounds of medical instruction and military planning would soon hear the call to prayer in Arabic, and the corridors where Christian pilgrims had found healing would serve new purposes under new masters. Yet even in this moment of apparent defeat, the Hospitallers demonstrated the principles that had defined them from their earliest days. When Saladin's representatives came to negotiate the terms of the city's surrender, they found themselves dealing with men who had not lost their dignity or abandoned their commitment to those they served. The brothers negotiated not for personal safety, though that was assured, but for the protection of Jerusalem's Christian population, for the preservation of their medical libraries, and for guarantees that their hospitals would continue to serve all who needed healing. The Muslim leader, who had heard stories of Hospitaller courage and compassion, granted terms that were remarkably generous. The brothers would be allowed to leave with their personal possessions, their medical texts, and their sacred relics. More importantly, they would be permitted to continue operating hospitals throughout Saladin's territories, serving Muslim and Christian patients with the same skill and dedication they had always shown. In the quiet hours before their departure, as the brothers moved through the hospital one last time, each room must have held memories that stretched back through generations of service. Here was the ward, where Brother Gerard himself had tended to those first pilgrims, where techniques that would spread across Europe had been developed through patient observation and gentle experimentation. There was the library, where texts from Arabic, Greek, and Latin traditions had been preserved and combined into new forms of medical knowledge. These corridors had witnessed countless moments of healing, of comfort offered to the dying, of miracles both small and large. Brother physicians packed their most precious books with the careful hands of men who understood they were preserving not just personal possessions, but the accumulated wisdom of generations. Surgical instruments that had saved hundreds of lives were wrapped in silk and placed in wooden chests alongside vials of medicines and carefully pressed samples of healing herbs. Each item represented years of learning, of trial and error, of knowledge gained through the dedicated service of brothers who had often risked their own lives to heal others. The evacuation itself became a testament to hospitaller organization and discipline. Despite the emotional weight of leaving their foundational home, the brothers coordinated their departure with the same efficiency they had brought to military campaigns and medical operations. Patients who were too ill to travel were carefully transferred to the care of local physicians, along with detailed records of their treatments and detailed instructions for their ongoing care. As the last Hospitaller brothers walked through Jerusalem's gates, carrying their portable wealth of knowledge and experience, they faced questions that would define their order's future. Who were they if not the guardians of Jerusalem's Christian hospital? What was their purpose if not the protection of pilgrims to the Holy City? Could an order founded on service to a specific place find meaning in exile? The immediate aftermath was a period of profound soul-searching. Scattered across various Mediterranean ports, different groups of brothers debated whether their mission had ended with the loss of Jerusalem or whether it could be adapted to new circumstances. Some argued for dissolution, believing that their specific calling had been to serve in the Holy City and that this calling had now ended. Others insisted that their vows transcended geography, that the need for healing and protection of the vulnerable existed everywhere. The crisis deepened when news arrived that Jerusalem was not their only loss. Saladin's forces had captured most of the Crusader strongholds throughout the Holy Land, leaving the Hospitallers without the network of castles and commanderies that had supported their operations for decades. Properties that had taken generations to build and fortify were now in Muslim hands. Investments of money, labor, and life that represented the contributions of thousands of European supporters had seemingly been lost overnight. Yet, in this darkest period, the Hospitallers discovered something profound about the nature of their calling. The loss of their physical infrastructure, painful as it was, could not diminish the knowledge they carried in their heads, the skills they had developed through decades of practice, or the network of relationships they had built across the Christian world. Their European commanderies remained intact, still generating resources and still sending new recruits. Their reputation for medical excellence and military courage remained undiminished. More importantly, they began to understand that their mission had never been tied to a single city or building, but to a set of principles: the healing of the sick, the protection of the vulnerable, the creation of spaces where mercy could flourish even in a world marked by conflict. These principles could be lived out anywhere, could find expression in new circumstances, could adapt to changing political and military realities without losing their essential meaning. The months of uncertainty and debate that followed the loss of Jerusalem became a period of refinement and renewal. Brothers who had sometimes taken their mission for granted were forced to articulate exactly what they believed and why they believed it. The result was an order that understood itself more clearly, that was more committed to its core principles, and that was paradoxically stronger for having lost the physical foundation of its identity. As 187 drew to a close, the scattered communities of Hospitallers began to receive letters from their leadership outlining a new chapter in their 8th century story. They would not dissolve or abandon their mission. Instead, they would adapt, would find new ways to serve, would discover that endings are sometimes disguised beginnings. They had lost Jerusalem, but they had not lost their calling. The next phase of their remarkable journey was about to begin. Imagine standing on the wind-swept harbour of Rhodes in the year 1309, watching as Hospitaller galleys emerge from the morning mist, their distinctive banners streaming in the Mediterranean breeze. After decades of wandering brief settlements in Cyprus, temporary headquarters in various European ports. They were coming home to an island that would become their greatest achievement, a maritime fortress state that would dominate the Eastern Mediterranean for over 2 centuries. The transformation of Rhodes from a Byzantine backwater into the headquarters of a militant religious order was nothing short of extraordinary. Picture the Grand Master Falques de Villaret walking along the ancient harbour walls, his experienced eye seeing not what the island was, but what it could become. These weathered stones that had once sheltered Greek merchants and Roman galleys would soon protect fleets that patrolled sea lanes from the Black Sea to the coast of North Africa. Under Hospitaller rule, Rhodes became something unprecedented in medieval Europe, a thoroughly planned society where every aspect of life served both military efficiency and their enduring mission of healing. The brothers approached their island home with the same methodical precision they had once applied to managing hospitals and organizing cavalry charges. Every harbour improvement, every fortification, every administrative decision reflected their hard-won understanding of how to balance idealism with practical necessity. Watch the transformation unfold through the patient years of construction and organization. The ancient harbour, partially silted and inadequate for large ships, was systematically dredged and expanded. New moles were built to protect anchored vessels from the sudden storms that could sweep across the Aegean without warning. Shipyards were established, where the brothers could build and maintain the galleys that would become their primary weapons in the ongoing struggle with Muslim naval forces. The city itself was redesigned according to principles learned through centuries of military architecture. The Street of the Knights, where the different national groups within the order maintained their distinctive headquarters, became a masterpiece of functional beauty. Each tongue, as the national divisions were called, contributed their own architectural traditions while adhering to overall defensive requirements. French knights brought their expertise in castle construction. English brothers contributed their knowledge of siege warfare. German knights shared their understanding of artillery, and Spanish brothers offered their experience with fortification against Muslim attack. But perhaps most remarkably, the Hospitallers created on Rhodes a society that genuinely embodied their dual commitment to warfare and healing. The great hospital they built rivaled anything in contemporary Europe, equipped with surgical facilities that incorporated medical knowledge gathered from across the Mediterranean world. The brothers who had learned healing techniques in Jerusalem, Acre, and Cyprus now had the resources and stability to create a medical center that served not just their own military needs, but the broader maritime community of the Eastern Mediterranean. The daily rhythm of life on Hospitaller Rhodes reflected this balance between martial and medical concerns. Brothers would begin each day with prayers in the magnificent Gothic church they built to replace the island's ancient temples. After prayers, some would head to the hospital wards to tend to patients. Wounded knights recovering from naval battles, merchant sailors injured in storms, local residents seeking treatment for diseases that the brothers had learned to cure through their international medical experience. Others would move to the harbour, where the constant business of maintaining and operating a war fleet demanded attention. The galleys that protected Christian merchant shipping and raided Muslim vessels were marvels of medieval naval technology, but they required constant maintenance and skilled crews. Hospitaller brothers learned to become not just knights, but sailors, navigators, engineers, and naval commanders. The transformation of these landlocked warrior monks into masters of maritime warfare was one of the most remarkable adaptations in medieval military history. Men who had learned to charge on horseback across the plains of Palestine now learned to coordinate ship movements in the confined waters of the Aegean archipelago. Knights who had once studied the approaches to castle gates now mastered the wind patterns and tidal currents that determined success in naval warfare. Yet through all these changes, they maintained their commitment to the principles that had defined them since Brother Gerard's time. Their naval operations, while often ruthless in their efficiency, were governed by codes of conduct that distinguished them from mere pirates. They treated prisoners well, offered medical care to wounded enemies, and maintained diplomatic relationships, even with Muslim leaders they fought. The hospital they built on Rhodes became a symbol of their enduring values. Unlike medieval European hospitals that served primarily as hospices for the dying poor, the Rhodian hospital was designed as an active center of healing. Its architects incorporated the best design principles from across the Mediterranean world: high ceilings that promoted air circulation, large windows that provided natural light for surgical procedures, and sophisticated water systems that maintained sanitation standards unmatched in Northern Europe. The brothers who served as physicians in this hospital continued the Hospitaller tradition of treating patients regardless of their ability to pay, their religion, or their nationality. Muslim sailors rescued from shipwrecks received the same care as Christian merchants. Orthodox Greek patients were treated with the same skill as Latin Catholics. Jewish merchants found in the Hospitaller Hospital the same quality of care they might seek in their home communities. This medical reputation proved to be one of their most valuable diplomatic assets. Even Muslim leaders who fought Hospitaller naval forces would sometimes negotiate for medical treatment for important individuals. The brothers' reputation for medical excellence transcended religious and political boundaries, creating relationships of respect that sometimes proved more valuable than military victories. The economic transformation of Rhodes under Hospitaller rule was equally impressive. The island became a major entrepot in the Eastern Mediterranean trade network, as merchants learned that Hospitaller control meant safe harbors, honest dealing, and protection from pirates. The taxes and fees generated by this commercial activity funded not just military operations, but also the hospitals, libraries, and charitable works that remained central to the order's mission. The brothers developed sophisticated administrative systems to manage their island state. Property records, tax assessments, judicial proceedings, and diplomatic correspondence were maintained with a precision that reflected their experience managing properties across Europe. They created legal systems that balanced their own religious law with the practical needs of governing a diverse population that included Orthodox Greeks, Western Catholics, Muslims, and Jews. As the 14th and 15th centuries progressed, Rhodes became recognized as one of the most efficiently governed territories in the Mediterranean world. Visitors from across Europe came to study Hospitaller administrative techniques, medical practices, and military innovations. The island, that had been a forgotten Byzantine outpost, had become a center of learning and innovation that influenced developments across the medieval world. The brothers who walked the walls of Rhodes in the quiet hours before dawn, watching for sails on the horizon that might bring friend or foe, understood that they had created something unique. They had built a society that successfully balanced military necessity with charitable mission, that prospered economically while maintaining spiritual values, that commanded respect through strength while earning affection through service. Yet, even as they took pride in their achievements, the most experienced brothers understood that their success had attracted the attention of an enemy whose resources dwarfed their own. The Ottoman Empire, growing stronger with each passing decade, had begun to see the hospitaller state on Rhodes not as a minor irritant, but as a significant obstacle to Ottoman control of the eastern Mediterranean. In the golden light of a Mediterranean dawn, as the sun rises over the fortified harbour of Rhodes, the morning routine begins that has made the Knights Hospitaller the most respected maritime power in the eastern seas. Brother Captain Andreas stands on the battlements of the Palace of the Grand Master, his experienced eye scanning the horizon for the sails that will determine the day's activities. In the harbour below, war galleys rest at anchor like sleeping sea wolves, their bronze rams gleaming in the early light, ready to transform from peaceful vessels into instruments of war at a moment's notice. This is the height of Hospitaller power on Rhodes, a period when their red banners with the white eight-pointed cross are known and respected from Venice to Constantinople, from the Black Sea ports to the harbours of North Africa. They have become something unprecedented in medieval politics, a maritime republic governed by monks, a commercial power run by warriors, a diplomatic force that maintains its independence through the careful balance of military strength and practical wisdom. Watch as the morning unfolds in the Grand Master's palace, where the business of governing their island state proceeds with the same methodical efficiency that once characterized their hospital administration. Diplomatic correspondence arrives with each ship, letters from European kings seeking Hospitaller assistance against Ottoman expansion, requests from Italian merchants for safe passage through pirate-infested waters, carefully worded communications from Ottoman officials proposing temporary truces or prisoner exchanges. The Grand Master, surrounded by the commanders of the various national tongues within the order, must navigate political currents as complex and dangerous as the physical currents his sea captains master. Each decision, whether to honor a Venetian request for naval support, whether to risk Ottoman anger by raiding their shipping, whether to accept a Genoese proposal for joint operations, could determine not just immediate profits or losses, but the very survival of their island state. In the harbour, the scene is one of controlled activity that reflects centuries of accumulated maritime expertise. Hospitaller galleys are being prepared for patrol, their crews a mixture of brother knights who have learned seamanship and professional sailors from across the Mediterranean, who serve for wages that are generous enough to ensure loyalty. Each galley represents a massive investment, not just in gold and materials, but in the specialized knowledge required to build and operate vessels that can serve as both warships and cargo carriers. The brothers who command these vessels have undergone training that would have amazed their predecessors who fought on horseback in Palestine. They have learned to read Mediterranean weather patterns, to navigate by stars and currents, to coordinate fleet movements across hundreds of miles of open water. They understand ship construction, artillery placement, the logistics of maintaining vessels far from home ports, and the complex diplomacy required to operate in waters claimed by multiple competing powers. Their naval operations have evolved far beyond simple piracy or coastal raiding. Hospitaller fleets now coordinate with Venetian and Genoese squadrons in complex operations designed to control trade routes and limit Ottoman expansion. They maintain permanent stations at strategic points throughout the Aegean, where small garrisons of brothers oversee watchtowers that can signal the approach of enemy fleets or provide refuge for friendly vessels caught in storms. Yet through all these military and commercial activities, they have never abandoned the healing mission that remains at their core. The Great Hospital of Rhodes has become a medical center that serves the entire Eastern Mediterranean, its reputation for excellence drawing patients from across the region. Brother physicians trained in the diverse medical traditions they have encountered throughout their travels now practice a form of medicine that synthesizes the best knowledge from Arabic, Greek, and Latin sources. The hospital's design reflects their accumulated experience in treating the particular challenges of maritime life. Special wards have been designed for treating sailors injured in storms or battles, with facilities for amputating limbs damaged beyond repair, and prosthetics workshops where skilled craftsmen create artificial hands and legs for men who have lost limbs in service. Other sections focus on tropical diseases picked up in distant ports, eye conditions caused by long exposure to reflected sunlight off water, and the nutritional disorders common among men who spend months at sea. The brothers who serve as physicians in this hospital continue the tradition of treating all patients equally, regardless of their ability to pay or their religious affiliation. Muslim sailors captured in battle receive the same medical care as Christian merchants. Greek sailors who have served on Ottoman vessels are treated with the same skill as Italians who have fought alongside Hospitaller fleets. This reputation for impartial medical care has become one of their most valuable diplomatic assets, earning them respect even from enemies who fight their military forces. The economic success of Hospitaller Rhodes reflects their skill in adapting their military capabilities to commercial opportunities. Their war galleys, when not engaged in combat operations, serve as armed merchant vessels, carrying high-value cargoes between ports where their military reputation guarantees safe passage. They have developed trading relationships with merchants from across the Mediterranean, offering security services that allow commercial ventures to operate in areas too dangerous for unescorted vessels. The administrative systems they have developed to manage their island state represent one of the most sophisticated governmental structures in the medieval Mediterranean. Property ownership, commercial contracts, judicial proceedings, and diplomatic relations are all managed according to written codes that reflect centuries of accumulated experience in governing diverse populations. Their legal system balances their own religious law with practical accommodations to local customs and commercial requirements. The cultural life of Hospitaller Rhodes reflects the cosmopolitan nature of their maritime empire. The libraries they maintain include texts in Latin, Greek, Arabic, and various European vernacular languages. Their architects incorporate design elements learned from across their area of operations, creating buildings that are both functional and beautiful. Their craftsmen produce goods that combine European techniques with Eastern decorative traditions, creating products valued from London to Cairo. Yet, even as they celebrate their achievements, the most experienced brothers understand the challenges they face. The Ottoman Empire continues to grow stronger, consolidating control over territories that once provided the Hospitallers with allies and trading partners. Ottoman naval capabilities are improving with each passing year, as Turkish admirals learn from their encounters with Hospitaller fleets and adapt their tactics accordingly. The delicate balance of diplomacy that has allowed the Hospitallers to maintain their independence is becoming increasingly difficult to sustain. European powers that once provided reliable support are becoming more concerned with Ottoman pressure on their own territories, and less willing to risk Ottoman anger by supporting a distant island fortress. Commercial relationships that once provided reliable income are being disrupted by changing political circumstances and Ottoman control of traditional trade routes. As the 15th century draws to a close, the Knights Hospitaller have achieved something remarkable. They have created a maritime state that successfully balances military effectiveness, commercial prosperity, and charitable service. But storm clouds are gathering on the horizon, and the greatest test of their resilience is yet to come. The morning mist that rises from the waters surrounding Rhodes carries with it more than the salt tang of the Mediterranean. It carries whispers of change, rumors of preparation, signs of a gathering storm that will test everything the Knights Hospitaller have built over 2 centuries of island rule. As Grand Master Pierre d'Aubusson stands on his palace walls in the quiet hour before dawn, his weathered eyes scanning the eastern horizon, he knows that the Ottoman Empire has grown too powerful to ignore the Hospitaller stronghold that blocks Turkish expansion into the western Mediterranean. Picture the scene in Ottoman naval yards along the coast of Anatolia, where shipwrights who have learned their craft from Genoese and Venetian masters work alongside Turkish engineers who have adapted European artillery techniques to Ottoman needs. Under the watchful eyes of Sultan Mehmed II, the same ruler who conquered Constantinople 3 decades earlier. The challenge facing the Hospitallers is unlike anything they have confronted before. Their previous enemies had been limited by resources, divided by competing interests, or constrained by the geographical challenges of mounting sustained operations against a fortified island. The Ottomans possess none of these limitations. Their empire stretches from the Balkans to Egypt, providing unlimited manpower and resources. Their administration is centralized and efficient, capable of coordinating complex operations across vast distances. Most dangerously, they have learned from previous failures, adapting their military techniques to overcome the specific advantages that Hospitaller Rhodes has exploited for 2 centuries. In the council chambers of the Palace of the Grand Master, the atmosphere is tense with debates that reflect the complexity of their situation. The younger knights, raised on stories of past Hospitaller victories, argue for aggressive action. Preemptive strikes against Ottoman naval bases, raids designed to disrupt enemy preparations, diplomatic efforts to create anti-Ottoman coalitions among Christian powers. Their enthusiasm reflects the martial spirit that has always characterized the order, but their proposals reveal a dangerous misunderstanding of the scale of the threat they face. The older brothers, men who have spent decades learning the harsh realities of Mediterranean politics, understand that traditional military solutions are insufficient against an enemy of Ottoman power and determination. They advocate for different strategies, diplomatic negotiations that might secure reasonable terms for surrender, evacuation plans that would preserve the order's human resources for future service, careful preparation of defenses that could make Ottoman victory so expensive that the Turks might seek easier targets. Brother Commander Giovanni, recently returned from a reconnaissance mission to Ottoman ports, describes what he has witnessed. Shipyards working day and night, artillery foundries producing cannons designed specifically for siege warfare, military camps where tens of thousands of men train for amphibious operations. The Ottoman preparations are not the hasty improvisation of an opportunistic raid, but the methodical organization of a campaign designed to eliminate Hospitaller power once and for all. Yet even as they prepare for what many believe will be their final battle, the brothers maintain their commitment to the healing mission that has defined them for over 4 centuries. The great hospital of Rhodes continues to function, its wards filled with patients who have no awareness that the men treating them may soon be fighting for their lives. Brother physicians continue their rounds, mixing medicines and treating wounds with the same careful attention they have always provided. The first Ottoman assault comes in 1480, a massive expedition that arrives with the confidence of overwhelming superiority. Sultan Mehmed, veteran of Constantinople's fall, has assembled a fleet of 160 vessels carrying over 100,000 men, supported by artillery that includes the largest cannons yet seen in Mediterranean warfare. Against this force, the Hospitallers can field perhaps 600 brother knights and maybe 4,000 auxiliaries drawn from the island's civilian population. But the Ottomans have underestimated what 4 centuries of military experience can accomplish when combined with intimate knowledge of local conditions and absolute commitment to survival. The Hospitallers have spent decades preparing for this moment, not just by strengthening their fortifications, but by developing tactics specifically designed to negate Ottoman advantages while exploiting Turkish weaknesses. Watch the siege unfold through the eyes of Brother Andreas, manning the walls during the pre-dawn hours when Ottoman artillery begins its daily bombardment. The psychological pressure is enormous. The constant thunder of cannon fire, the gradual destruction of walls that have stood for centuries, the knowledge that every day brings the enemy closer to overwhelming their defenses. Yet the brothers maintain their discipline, rotating between military duties and hospital service, praying together at prescribed times, sharing meals, and maintaining the routine that has structured their lives since they first took vows. The turning point comes when Ottoman forces attempt to storm the breached walls, expecting to find demoralized defenders ready to surrender. Instead, they encounter men who have spent their entire adult lives preparing for exactly this moment, warriors who understand that their cause transcends personal survival, that their death in defense of their mission is not defeat, but fulfillment. The Ottoman withdrawal after 3 months of siege represents more than military victory. It demonstrates that small forces guided by clear principles and absolute commitment can still prevail against overwhelming odds. But the brothers understand that their victory is temporary. The Ottomans will return better prepared, more determined, and with resources that the Hospitallers cannot hope to match indefinitely. The decades following the 1480 siege become a period of careful preparation for the final confrontation that everyone knows is coming. European support, never reliable, becomes increasingly difficult to obtain as Christian powers focus on Ottoman threats closer to home. Commercial income, disrupted by Ottoman control of traditional trade routes, provides insufficient resources for the level of fortification that modern siege warfare requires. Yet the brothers use this time well, strengthening their defenses while maintaining their medical and charitable work. They understand that their ultimate legacy will not be determined by military victories or defeats, but by their faithfulness to the principles that have guided them since Brother Gerard first opened his hospital doors to sick pilgrims 4 centuries earlier. As the 16th century dawns, the Hospitallers on Rhodes face their destiny with the same quiet courage that has characterized their order throughout its long history. They have created something remarkable on their island home, but they understand that all human achievements are temporary. What matters is not whether they can preserve what they have built, but whether they can meet the coming challenge in a manner worthy of their calling. The Ottoman challenge of 1522 approaches like an inevitable tide, and the Knights Hospitaller prepare to face it with the dignity and courage that has defined them for over 4 centuries of service to others. The summer solstice of 1522 dawns over Rhodes with an ominous stillness, as if the very air holds its breath before the storm that everyone knows is coming. Grand Master Philippe Villiers de Lille, Adam stands in his private chapel, completing the morning prayers that have structured his days for decades, while outside the palace walls, the greatest fleet the Ottoman Empire has ever assembled darkens the eastern horizon like a gathering thundercloud. Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, inheritor of his grandfather's determination to eliminate the Hospitaller stronghold, has brought to Rhodes a force that dwarfs the 1480 expedition. 400 vessels carry 200,000 men, supported by artillery that includes cannons capable of reducing the strongest medieval fortifications to rubble. Against this overwhelming force, the defenders can muster fewer than 700 brother knights, and perhaps 6,000 auxiliary troops drawn from the island's loyal population. Picture the scene as the Ottoman fleet approaches the harbour that has sheltered Hospitaller galleys for over 2 centuries. The brothers who line the ancient walls understand that they are witnessing the end of an era, not just their own rule over Rhodes, but the conclusion of a chapter in Mediterranean history that began when their predecessors first established themselves as a maritime power. Yet their faces show not despair, but the quiet resolve of men who have spent their entire lives preparing for exactly this moment. Brother Captain Andreas, now grey-haired from decades of service, moves among the younger knights who will experience their first siege. His words are few but carefully chosen. They are not fighting to preserve their own lives, but to demonstrate that the principles for which they have lived are worth dying for. They are not defending stones and mortar, but the idea that mercy can coexist with strength, that healing can flourish even in a world dominated by violence. The siege begins with a methodical Ottoman bombardment that continues day and night, the massive cannons systematically reducing walls that have stood for centuries to piles of rubble and dust. The psychological impact is enormous. The constant thunder that makes sleep impossible. The gradual destruction of familiar landmarks. The knowledge that each day brings the enemy assault forces closer to success. Yet, in the midst of this destruction, the Hospitallers maintain the discipline and routine that have structured their lives since they first took vows. Each morning, despite the cannon fire, they gather for prayers in whatever chapel remains intact. Each day, some brothers man the walls, while others continue their rounds in the hospital, treating wounded defenders with the same care they have always offered to patients. The siege has not changed who they are. It has simply provided the ultimate test of whether they can remain true to themselves under impossible circumstances. Watch as the weeks pass, and the Ottoman noose tightens around the remaining defendable positions. The great harbour that once sheltered fleets from across the Christian world is now crowded with enemy vessels. The commercial districts where merchants from Venice, Genoa, and Marseille once conducted prosperous trade are occupied by Ottoman forces. The suburbs where Greek families had lived peacefully under Hospitaller rule for generations are now Turkish military camps. In the hospital that represents the heart of their mission, brother physicians continue their work under increasingly difficult conditions. Medical supplies, already limited by the siege, must be carefully rationed. Surgical procedures are performed while cannonballs crash into nearby walls. Yet the wounded continue to receive care, the dying continue to receive comfort, and the hospital continues to embody the values that have defined the order since Brother Gerard first opened his doors to sick pilgrims. The most remarkable aspect of this final siege is not the military drama, but the quiet dignity with which the defenders face their fate. These are men who have voluntarily surrendered the ordinary pleasures and ambitions of medieval life, wealth, family, worldly advancement, in service of something they believe transcends individual existence. The siege has not forced them to choose between survival and principle. They made that choice decades earlier, when they took their vows. Brother Marcus, tending wounded Turkish prisoners in the hospital while Ottoman cannons destroy the walls above his head, embodies the paradox that has always characterized his order. The same commitment that makes him willing to die fighting Turkish soldiers also compels him to heal Turkish wounded with the same skill he offers to Christian defenders. This is not contradictory behavior, but the logical expression of principles that recognize the dignity of all human suffering. As autumn arrives and the siege enters its 6th month, both sides understand that the conclusion is inevitable. Ottoman resources are unlimited. They can afford to lose 10 men for every defender killed, can replace destroyed artillery with better cannons, can sustain the siege indefinitely. The Hospitallers, despite their heroic resistance, cannot replace their losses, cannot repair damage faster than Ottoman cannons can inflict it, cannot hope for relief that is not coming. Yet when Grand Master Villiers de Lille, Adam, begins negotiations for surrender, he bargains not for his own life or personal advantage, but for the welfare of the people who have served under him and the civilians who have suffered alongside his knights. The terms he seeks reflect the values that have guided his order throughout its long history: protection for the innocent, care for the wounded, respect for those who have shown courage even in defeat. Sultan Suleiman, who has studied the history of Hospitaller resistance and understands the quality of the men he has been fighting, grants terms that are remarkable for their generosity. The surviving knights will be allowed to leave Rhodes with their personal possessions, their archives, their sacred relics, and their honor intact. The civilian population will be protected from reprisal. The hospital will continue to function under Ottoman rule, serving Muslim and Christian patients according to Hospitaller medical traditions. The final departure from Rhodes on January 1, 1523, becomes a ceremony that honors both victor and vanquished. Ottoman soldiers line the route to the harbor, offering a salute of respect to men who have demonstrated what courage and principle can accomplish, even against impossible odds. The surviving Hospitallers walk to their ships, carrying not just their material possessions, but something more valuable: the knowledge that they have remained faithful to their calling, even unto death. Brother Andreas, now among the elderly knights helping to organize the evacuation, moves through the empty hospital one final time. The beds where he has tended countless patients are now bare. The surgical instruments he has used to heal warriors from across the Mediterranean are packed in wooden chests. The herb garden, where he learned to cultivate healing plants according to techniques passed down through generations of brother physicians, is withering in the winter cold. Yet, as he walks these familiar corridors for the last time, his mind is not focused on loss, but on continuity. The medical knowledge they are carrying away from Rhodes represents centuries of accumulated wisdom that will find new expression in whatever refuge they eventually discover. The principles they have demonstrated during this siege, courage without hatred, strength without cruelty, faithfulness unto death, will inspire future generations who face their own impossible challenges. The ships that carry the surviving Hospitallers away from Rhodes bear men who have lost a home, but not a calling, who have been defeated in battle, but not in spirit, who understand that sometimes the greatest victories come through the manner in which one faces defeat. Their 8th century story is not ending. It is simply preparing for its next chapter in the ongoing human struggle between the forces of chaos and the ancient human dreams of healing, mercy, and service to others. 7 years of wandering have passed since the last Hospitaller ship departed from Rhodes. 7 years of uncertain refuge in European ports where the surviving knights have struggled to maintain their identity while searching for a permanent home. Now, in 5030, as their galleys approach the limestone cliffs of Malta through waters that sparkle in the Mediterranean sun, Grand Master Philippe Villiers de Lisle. To most eyes, Malta appears to be a poor consolation prize. Barren rocks rising from the sea, harbours that require extensive work to accommodate large ships, soil so thin that even the hardiest crops struggle to take root. The imperial gift comes with conditions that reflect its apparent worthlessness. The Hospitallers must pay an annual rent of 1 Maltese falcon to the King of Sicily, must defend the islands against Muslim attack, and must never surrender them without imperial permission. Yet as the Grand Master walks the ancient fortifications of the small town that will become their new headquarters, his experienced eye sees possibilities that escape casual observation. These islands occupy one of the most strategic positions in the Mediterranean, controlling the narrow waters between Sicily and North Africa. The harbours, while requiring improvement, could be developed into naval bases that would allow control of shipping routes between the eastern and western Mediterranean. Most importantly, the islands are large enough to support a significant population, while small enough to be thoroughly fortified. Picture the transformation that begins almost immediately after the Hospitallers take possession of their new home. Brothers who have spent decades learning the arts of war and healing now become architects, engineers, and urban planners. The small medieval town that existed when they arrived will be systematically expanded and redesigned according to principles learned through centuries of fortress construction and hospital administration. The centerpiece of their construction program is Valletta, an entirely planned city that will rival Venice and Naples in its architectural sophistication. Unlike medieval towns that grew organically around ancient centers, Valletta is designed from the beginning as an integrated whole. Every street planned for maximum defensive advantage, every building positioned to serve both civilian and military needs, every architectural detail reflecting both practical necessity and aesthetic ambition. Watch as the construction proceeds through the patient decades of the 16th century. Master craftsmen recruited from across Europe work alongside brother knights who have learned engineering through practical experience. Limestone blocks quarried from the island's bedrock are carefully fitted into walls that must withstand both Ottoman cannon fire and Mediterranean storms. Gardens and courtyards are incorporated into the defensive design, ensuring that the city can feed itself during extended sieges while providing spaces where healing herbs can flourish. The hospital they build in Valletta represents the culmination of centuries of medical experience. Unlike their Rhodes facility, which was adapted from earlier structures, this hospital is designed from the foundation upward to serve their healing mission with maximum efficiency. Large windows provide natural light for surgical procedures. Sophisticated ventilation systems prevent the accumulation of unhealthy air. Water systems maintain sanitation standards that will not be matched in Northern Europe for centuries. The medical work they pursue in Malta reflects their accumulated knowledge from across the Mediterranean world. Brother physicians who trained in Rhodes, who studied Arabic medical texts in Jerusalem, who learned surgical techniques during decades of treating battle wounds, now have the stability and resources to pursue medical education at the highest level. The hospital school they establish begins training physicians who will serve not just the order's military needs, but civilian populations across the Mediterranean region. Yet even as they focus on their peaceful missions, the brothers understand that their new home places them directly in the path of Ottoman expansion. Malta's strategic position, which makes it valuable to the Hospitallers, also makes it a target for Turkish forces seeking to complete their control of Mediterranean shipping. The same islands that could serve as bases for Christian naval operations could equally serve Ottoman fleets seeking to threaten Italian and Spanish coasts. The great test comes in 1565, when Sultan Suleiman, now aging but still determined to eliminate the Hospitallers who have escaped him once, sends a massive expedition to complete what the siege of Rhodes had begun. The force that arrives at Malta is even larger than the one that conquered Rhodes, 180 ships carrying 48,000 men, including the elite Janissary Corps that has conquered territories from Hungary to Yemen. Grandmaster Jean de Valette, now 70 years old but still vigorous in leadership, faces the same impossible odds that his predecessors confronted at Rhodes. The Hospitallers can field only 540 knights, and perhaps 5,000 auxiliaries drawn from the Maltese population. Against Ottoman forces that outnumber them 10 to 1, they must hold fortifications that are still incomplete and islands that lack the natural advantages Rhodes had provided. But the brothers who prepare for this siege have learned from their Rhodes experience. They understand that victory requires not just courage, but careful preparation, intelligent tactics, and absolute commitment to their mission. Every approach to the harbours has been studied and prepared. Every fortification has been designed to maximize defensive advantages. Every contingency has been planned and rehearsed. The siege that follows becomes one of the most celebrated defensive actions in military history, not because of its scale, but because of the principles it demonstrates. The Hospitallers fight not as men seeking personal glory or material advantage, but as warriors defending a way of life that embodies their deepest values. Their resistance inspires not just military admiration, but moral respect from observers across Europe who understand that more than territory is at stake. Brother Captain Giovanni, manning the walls of Fort Saint-Sente, Elmo during the desperate early weeks of the siege, embodies the spirit that makes Hospitaller resistance so effective. He fights knowing that his death is likely, but also knowing that his sacrifice serves something larger than personal survival. The same commitment that would lead him to risk his life treating plague victims leads him to risk his life defending the community that makes such service possible. The Turkish withdrawal after 4 months of savage fighting represents more than military victory. It demonstrates that the principles the Hospitallers have lived by for over 4 centuries remain viable, even in an age of gunpowder warfare and imperial ambition. European observers understand that Malta has been saved not just by superior tactics or fortunate circumstances, but by the quality of men who were willing to die for what they believed. The decades following the Great Siege become a period of consolidation and cultural flowering that represent the Hospitallers at their most successful. The wealth that flows to them from grateful European donors, combined with their control of strategic shipping routes, provides resources for architectural projects that make Malta one of the most beautiful cities in the Mediterranean world. The Palace of the Grand Master becomes a center of diplomacy, where representatives of European powers meet to coordinate policy toward the Ottoman Empire. The libraries they maintain preserve not just medical and military knowledge, but historical and philosophical works that contribute to the broader intellectual development of European culture. Their workshops produce art, crafts, and scientific instruments that are valued from London to Constantinople. Yet through all their success and recognition, the brothers maintain their commitment to the healing mission that has defined them since Brother Gerard's time. The hospital in Valletta continues to serve patients from across the Mediterranean world. Medical research continues to advance techniques for treating conditions ranging from battle wounds to tropical diseases. The tradition of serving all patients equally, regardless of their religion or ability to pay, continues to distinguish Hospitaller medicine from commercial medical practice. As the 17th century progresses, Malta under Hospitaller rule becomes recognized as one of the most efficiently governed territories in Europe. Visitors from across the continent come to study their administrative techniques, their fortification methods, their medical practices, and their approach to balancing military necessity with charitable mission. The brothers who walk the ramparts of Valletta in the quiet hours before dawn, watching for sails that might bring friends or enemies, understand that they have created something remarkable. They have demonstrated that a religious order can successfully adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining its core identity, that military effectiveness can coexist with charitable service, that small communities guided by clear principles can resist forces that seem overwhelming. Yet even in their success, the wisest among them understand that the world is changing in ways that will challenge everything they have built. New ideas about government, religion, and human nature are emerging that will question the very foundations of their medieval worldview. As the 18th century dawns over the ancient walls of Valletta, the morning light reveals more than the familiar sight of Hospitaller galleys in the harbour and brother knights making their rounds through well-ordered streets. It illuminates a world that is changing in ways that challenge the very foundations of medieval religious orders, where new ideas about reason, individual liberty, and human progress are beginning to question institutions that have remained unchanged for centuries. Picture Grand Master Antonio Manuel de Vilhena reading correspondence from European courts in his magnificent palace, each letter bringing news of intellectual and political developments that seem to call into question the relevance of vows taken by men who have surrendered individual autonomy in service of collective mission. The philosophers of Paris speak of reason as the supreme guide to human action, seemingly dismissing the spiritual wisdom that has guided the order since Brother Gerard's time. The political theorists of London champion individual rights and democratic governance, apparently challenging the hierarchical structure that has enabled effective hospitaller administration for centuries. In the council chambers where hospitaller policy is debated, these changing currents create tensions between brothers who represent different responses to an evolving world. The older knights, men raised in the traditional understanding of their calling, argue for maintaining the ancient disciplines that have preserved their order through 8 centuries of challenge and change. Their position reflects not stubborn conservatism, but practical wisdom gained through observing how institutions survive and thrive over long periods. The younger brothers, many educated in European universities, where Enlightenment ideas dominate intellectual discourse, question whether medieval vows and disciplines remain relevant to contemporary service. They ask whether the order's effectiveness might be enhanced by adopting new organizational methods, whether their mission might be better served by embracing rather than resisting intellectual and social change, whether their commitment to healing and protection might find better expression through reformed rather than traditional approaches. Brother Alessandro, recently returned from medical studies in Paris, represents this new generation of hospitallers who seek to integrate Enlightenment learning with traditional service. His surgical techniques reflect the latest advances in European medicine. His administrative methods incorporate new theories about organizational efficiency, and his approach to patient care embraces recent discoveries about the relationship between physical health and emotional well-being. Yet, as he makes his rounds through the ancient hospital wards, where generations of brother physicians have practiced the healing arts, he struggles with questions that go beyond medical technique. The philosophers whose lectures he attended in Paris spoke of human beings as autonomous individuals whose highest goals should be personal fulfillment and rational self-interest. How does such a worldview accommodate the vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience that have freed him from personal concerns and enabled him to serve others without regard for his own advantage? The hospital itself embodies these tensions between traditional service and contemporary expectations. The medical care provided remains among the finest available anywhere in Europe. Hospitaller physicians continue to treat patients regardless of their ability to pay, their religious affiliation, or their social status. The surgical techniques practiced incorporate the latest advances from across the European medical community. The research conducted contributes to general medical knowledge in ways that benefit patients far beyond Malta's shores. But European visitors increasingly view these achievements through the lens of Enlightenment criteria that emphasize rational efficiency over charitable mission. They praise hospitaller medical competence, while questioning the necessity of religious vows for medical practice. They admire administrative effectiveness, while suggesting that secular institutions might achieve similar results with greater flexibility and less expense. The naval operations that have made the Hospitallers masters of the central Mediterranean face similar intellectual challenges. Their galleys continue to protect Christian commerce from Muslim pirates. Their diplomatic relationships continue to serve European interests in dealings with Ottoman power, and their military effectiveness continues to earn respect from allies and enemies alike. Yet European courts increasingly question whether medieval religious orders are the appropriate agents for 18th century diplomatic and military activities. The emerging science of international relations suggests that state interests should be pursued through professional diplomats and regular armies, rather than through religious warriors bound by ancient vows. The developing theories of commercial policy suggest that trade should be protected through state navies rather than through orders whose ultimate loyalty is to spiritual rather than secular authority. Grand Master Wilhelm, governing an order that remains outwardly successful while facing fundamental questions about its continued relevance, must navigate between competing pressures that seem to offer no satisfactory resolution. European donors continue to support hospitaller activities, but their contributions increasingly come with suggestions for reform that would transform the order into something fundamentally different. Papal authority continues to support hospitaller independence, but even church leadership shows growing sympathy for Enlightenment critiques of medieval institutions. The internal debates that characterize hospitaller council meetings during this period reflect broader tensions within European civilization between traditional and modern approaches to organizing human society. Brothers who have devoted their lives to serving others through ancient disciplines find themselves defending not just their own way of life, but entire categories of human experience that Enlightenment thought tends to dismiss as irrational or obsolete. Yet the order's response to these challenges demonstrates the adaptability that has enabled its survival through 8 centuries of change. Rather than simply resisting new ideas, hospitaller leadership seeks to integrate Enlightenment insights with traditional wisdom in ways that enhance rather than compromise their fundamental mission. The educational programs they establish reflect this synthetic approach. The schools they operate in Malta provide instruction that combines classical languages and religious studies with mathematics, natural philosophy. The libraries they maintain preserve ancient texts while acquiring contemporary works on medicine, engineering, and political theory. The research they sponsor addresses practical questions about hospital administration, naval architecture, and diplomatic strategy using the best available methods from across the European intellectual community. Their medical practice evolves to incorporate new understanding about disease transmission, surgical procedure, and pharmaceutical preparation, while maintaining the traditional commitment to treating all patients with equal care and respect. Their administrative methods adopt improved techniques for record keeping, financial management, and personnel development, while preserving the hierarchical structure that enables effective coordination across their scattered operations. The architectural projects they undertake during this period reflect the same integration of traditional and contemporary elements. The churches they build combine Baroque decorative elements with classical proportions. The palaces they construct incorporate modern conveniences with traditional ceremonial requirements. The hospitals they design use the latest knowledge about ventilation, lighting, and patient care while maintaining the spiritual atmosphere that has always characterized hospitaller medical facilities. As the 18th century progresses, the order's ability to adapt while maintaining its essential character earns grudging respect even from critics who question the continued relevance of medieval religious institutions. European observers note that hospitaller administration remains efficient, their medical care remains excellent, and their military effectiveness remains formidable, even as they incorporate new methods and contemporary learning. But the fundamental challenge remains: can an institution founded on medieval assumptions about the relationship between individual and community, between temporal and spiritual authority, between traditional and rational approaches to human problems, survive in a world increasingly dominated by different assumptions about all these relationships? The answer will be determined not by intellectual arguments, but by practical events that will test whether centuries of accumulated wisdom and institutional experience can withstand the pressure of revolutionary change. The morning of June 9th, 1798, dawns over Malta with the deceptive tranquility that often precedes historical watersheds. Grand Master Ferdinand von Hompesch completes his customary prayers in the palace chapel, unaware that French ships appearing on the eastern horizon carry with them the end of an era that has stretched across 8 centuries, from Brother Gerard's simple hospital in Jerusalem to the magnificent city-state that surrounds him. Napoleon Bonaparte, leading his expedition toward Egypt and dreams of Eastern Empire, has decided that Malta's strategic position makes it too valuable to leave in the hands of what he considers a medieval relic. The young general, who has already transformed European warfare and politics, sees in the Knights Hospitaller not the heirs to a noble tradition of service, but obstacles to rational progress and French national interest. Picture the scene in the Grand Master's council chamber as reports arrive of the approaching French fleet. The brothers who gather to debate their response represent the accumulated wisdom and experience of centuries, but they face a challenge unlike any their order has previously encountered. This is not an Ottoman sultan seeking to expand Islamic territory, not a Muslim pirate threatening Christian commerce, but a European power led by men who view themselves as representatives of reason and progress, confronting the last remnants of medieval superstition. The military situation is hopeless from the beginning. The French expedition includes 55,000 veteran troops, commanded by officers who have learned their craft in the revolutionary wars that have transformed European military science. Against this force, the Hospitallers can field fewer than 300 aging knights, many of whom have spent more years managing hospitals and diplomatic correspondence than training for combat. But the political and psychological dimensions of their situation are even more challenging than the military imbalance. Many of the younger knights are themselves French, products of the same intellectual culture that has produced Napoleon and his officers. They have been educated in schools where Enlightenment philosophers questioned the assumptions underlying their vows, where political theorists criticized the hierarchical institutions that have structured their lives, where military reformers advocated the kind of rational professional approach to warfare that the French expedition embodies. Brother Henri, standing guard on the walls of Valletta as French landing boats approach the beaches below, embodies the psychological complexity of the Order's situation. His military training tells him to resist the invasion with all available force. His intellectual education suggests that French victory represents historical progress that cannot and perhaps should not be prevented. His spiritual vows demand loyalty to the order that has given meaning to his life, while his national identity connects him to the soldiers he is supposed to fight. Grand Master von Hompesch faces an impossible choice between alternatives that all involve betraying some aspect of his responsibility. Military resistance would lead to the destruction of the civilian population that has lived peacefully under Hospitaller protection for over 2 centuries. Diplomatic negotiation might preserve lives, but would require surrendering the independence that has enabled the Order to serve its mission according to its own principles. Evacuation might preserve the Order's human resources, but would abandon the people and institutions they have sworn to protect. The decision, when it comes, reflects not cowardice or incompetence, but the realistic assessment of a leader who understands that heroic gestures cannot alter historical inevitabilities. After token resistance that satisfies honor while avoiding useless bloodshed, the Grand Master agrees to surrender Malta to French authority in exchange for guarantees protecting the civilian population and provisions, allowing the Order to continue its charitable work under new political arrangements. The ceremony of surrender, conducted in the same palace halls where Grand Masters have governed for centuries, marks the end of the longest continuous sovereignty in European history. As von Hompesch signs documents transferring authority to French representatives, he understands that he is not just yielding political control of an island, but acknowledging the obsolescence of an entire way of organizing human society around spiritual rather than material priorities. Napoleon's treatment of the defeated Order reflects the intellectual currents that have shaped his own understanding of historical progress. He views the Hospitallers not as enemies to be destroyed, but as anachronisms to be dissolved through rational administration. The wealth accumulated over 8 centuries of donations and careful management is confiscated to fund French military operations. The libraries containing centuries of accumulated medical, military, and administrative knowledge are scattered or destroyed as irrelevant to modern needs. Yet even in defeat, individual knights demonstrate the principles that have guided their order through 8 centuries of service. Brother Francesco, loading the Order's medical equipment onto departure ships, ensures that the most effective surgical instruments and pharmaceutical preparations are preserved for future use. Brother Antonio, organizing evacuation records, maintains careful documentation of properties and obligations that might someday be reclaimed or honored. The final departure from Malta, accomplished with the same quiet dignity that characterized their departure from Rhodes 3 centuries earlier, represents more than the end of political independence. It marks the conclusion of an experiment in organizing human society around the assumption that spiritual values could provide effective guidance for practical activities, that religious commitment could coexist with administrative efficiency. The ships carrying the surviving knights away from Malta bear men who have lost not just a home, but an entire way of life. The world they are entering has little place for warrior monks, little patience with institutions that subordinate efficiency to principle, little sympathy for organizations that claim authority based on spiritual rather than rational criteria. As the limestone cliffs of Malta disappear behind them, the brothers understand that they are not just sailing toward uncertain refuge, but toward a future where their particular combination of military service, medical practice, and spiritual commitment will find few opportunities for expression. The age that valued their synthesis of temporal effectiveness with eternal purpose is ending, replaced by a new era that separates secular and sacred concerns into different spheres of human activity. Yet, in their quiet acceptance of historical change, in their continued commitment to serving others despite the loss of their institutional framework, they demonstrate that the principles embodied in 8 centuries of hospitaller service transcend the particular political and social arrangements that originally sustained them. In the quiet corridors of a contemporary hospital, as midnight shift nurses make their rounds checking on patients whose needs have not changed fundamentally since Brother Gerard first offered water to thirsty pilgrims, the ancient mission of the Knights Hospitaller continues in forms that would seem familiar to those medieval healers who began this long story 8 centuries ago. All began this long story 8 centuries ago. Consider the paramedic who responds to a highway accident in the early hours of morning, carrying medical equipment that would seem miraculous to Hospitaller brothers, but applying principles of triage and patient care that they would recognize immediately. The same commitment to treating all patients equally, regardless of their ability to pay or their social status, guides modern emergency medicine. The same willingness to risk personal safety in service of others motivates contemporary first responders. The same integration of practical skill with compassionate care characterizes the best modern medical practice. The influence of hospitaller innovation extends far beyond individual acts of service. The organizational structures they developed to coordinate activities across vast geographical distances provided models for modern international humanitarian organizations. The administrative techniques they perfected for managing complex institutions operating in multiple countries influence contemporary NGO management. The integration of charitable mission with professional competence that characterized their approach continues to guide organizations that combine service to others with operational excellence. Watch the volunteers who staff disaster relief operations in regions torn by conflict or natural catastrophe, and you witness the same synthesis of practical effectiveness with selfless service that defined hospitaller work in medieval hospitals and on crusade battlefields. Modern aid workers who travel to dangerous areas armed with nothing but medical supplies and stubborn compassion embody the same spirit that led medieval knights to take vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience in order to serve others more effectively. The architectural legacy of the Hospitallers continues to shape contemporary understanding of how buildings can embody values as well as serve practical functions. Barletta remains a UNESCO World Heritage Site, not just because of its historical significance, but because its design demonstrates how urban planning can integrate defensive necessity with aesthetic beauty, how public buildings can reflect community values while serving practical needs. Modern hospital design continues to reflect principles that Hospitaller architects pioneered: the importance of natural light in healing environments, the need for efficient circulation patterns that serve both patients and medical staff, the value of creating spaces that maintain human dignity even in circumstances of vulnerability and suffering. The most advanced contemporary medical facilities embody the same commitment to treating patients as whole human beings rather than merely collections of symptoms. The educational institutions that trace their origins to Hospitaller schools continue to reflect the Order's commitment to integrating practical training with broader intellectual development. Medical schools that emphasize not just technical competence, but ethical sensitivity. Nursing programs that combine clinical skills with humanistic understanding, and professional development programs that stress service to others alongside personal advancement, all reflect educational approaches that the Hospitallers pioneered. Perhaps most significantly, the Hospitaller model of balancing idealism with pragmatism remains relevant for anyone seeking to serve others effectively in a complex world. Their experience demonstrates that successful service requires not just good intentions, but also careful organization, disciplined training, and the willingness to adapt methods while preserving essential principles. The Order of Malta, the direct institutional descendant of the medieval Knights Hospitaller, continues to operate humanitarian programs in over 120 countries, providing medical care, disaster relief, and social services according to the same principles that guided Brother Gerard's work in 12th century Jerusalem. St. John ambulance services, which trace their origins to Hospitaller medical work, provide emergency medical coverage at public events throughout the English-speaking world. Modern military chaplains, combat medics, and medical personnel serving in conflict zones embody the same integration of healing and protection that characterized Hospitaller Knights. Their commitment to treating all wounded, regardless of their allegiance or beliefs, continues the tradition that distinguished Hospitaller hospitals from purely military medical facilities. The ethical frameworks that guide modern medical practice, informed consent, patient confidentiality, equal treatment regardless of ability to pay, reflect principles that the Hospitallers helped establish through 8 centuries of medical service. Their recognition that healing involves more than just physical treatment, that patients deserve dignity and respect, as well as medical competence, influences contemporary approaches to holistic healthcare. In our modern world of rapid technological change and increasing specialization, the Hospitaller example offers something precious: proof that it is possible to maintain consistent values while adapting to changing circumstances, to serve others effectively while preserving personal integrity, to create institutions that endure by remaining faithful to their founding principles. As we navigate our own complex challenges, global health crises, environmental disasters, social inequality, political conflict, their legacy lives on in every act of healing, offered without regard for reward. Every gesture of protection extended to the vulnerable, every commitment to serve others that transcends personal convenience or advantage. As we reach the end of this long journey through 8 centuries of remarkable history, let your mind drift back to where we began, to those quiet Jerusalem streets where Brother Gerard first opened his doors to sick pilgrims, where the simple act of offering water to the thirsty grew into a movement that would shape European civilization for nearly a millennium. The story of the Knights Hospitaller offers us something precious in our restless modern age: perspective on what truly endures. Empires that seemed invincible crumbled into dust. Kings who claimed divine authority were forgotten by history. Technologies that promised to revolutionize human life became obsolete curiosities. Yet the principles that guided a few dedicated men in a small Jerusalem hospital, the commitment to heal the sick, protect the vulnerable, and serve others without regard for personal advantage, continue to inspire and guide human action 8 centuries later. In our own time of uncertainty and rapid change, when global challenges seem overwhelming and individual actions appear insignificant, the Hospitaller example reminds us that ordinary people can create extraordinary legacies through simple acts of consistent service. Brother Gerard could not have imagined that his modest hospital would evolve into an international organization, that influenced medicine, military science, architecture, education, and humanitarian work across Europe and the Mediterranean. What matters is not the scale of our individual contributions, but the faithfulness with which we pursue them. The brothers who spent decades caring for unknown patients in remote commanderies, who copied medical texts by candlelight, who trained young knights in principles of service and sacrifice. These forgotten individuals created the foundation that enabled their more famous successors to achieve greatness. The rise and fall of the Hospitallers also teaches us about the nature of historical change itself. Institutions that seem permanent are always temporary. Political arrangements that appear stable eventually give way to new circumstances. What survives is not the specific forms that human idealism takes, but the idealistic impulse itself. The recognition that life finds its deepest meaning in service to others, that individual fulfillment comes through contributing to purposes larger than personal advantage. As you drift towards sleep, let yourself find comfort in the knowledge that the human capacity for compassion, service, and sacrifice that inspired Brother Gerard continues to manifest itself in countless quiet ways around the world. Every healthcare worker who chooses patient care over personal convenience, every teacher who invests in student success, every person who offers help to struggling neighbors, participates in the same ancient tradition of service that the Knights Hospitaller embodied for 8 remarkable centuries. The moonlight that falls tonight across the ancient stones of Jerusalem, Rhodes, and Malta illuminates not just the ruins of medieval institutions, but the continuing human story of which we are all part. The endless effort to heal what is broken, protect what is vulnerable, and create small islands of mercy in a world that often seems dominated by indifference. Rest peacefully, knowing that the best of human nature endures, and that tomorrow offers new opportunities to contribute to the ancient work of healing our world.